These terrifying historical photos of the Cuban Revolution will leave you shocked. Let's time travel and look at the history of the Cuban Revolution. These terrifying historical photos will leave you shocked and awestruck as you witness the brutal struggle for power that took place in Cuba. Who would have thought that a tiny island in the Caribbean would become a hotbed of socialist revolution? The Cuban Revolution paved the way of a new era of political change, and in this video we'll explore why it happened, what went down, and the far-reaching consequences that are still felt today. So, buckle up and get ready to uncover the shocking truth behind one of the most fascinating political upheavals of the 20th century. History. Cuba's history dates back to 3000 BC with the arrival of various tribes from North and South America. However, the local Taino tribe displaced most of them by the end of the 15th century. Spanish settlers arrived in 1492, leading to the displacement of the native population and the importation of African slaves for sugar production. This created a huge issue in Cuban history, with poor people from various origins clamoring for reform, inspired by events such as the American Revolution of 1776 to 1789. The uprising of the colonies under British rule in North America in 1776 led to the formation of the United States. In addition to the American and French revolutions, the 1791 Haitian Revolution also played a significant role in inspiring Cubans, particularly those of African descent, to seek their own independence. There was an attempted slave revolt in Cuba in 1795, but it failed. The French invasion of Spain during the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century also helped fuel Cuban desires for independence. Despite some liberalizing policies by the Spanish, Cuba was unable to gain full independence from Spain by the time of King Ferdinand VII's reign in 1823. King Ferdinand VII. Despite some liberalizing policies from the Spanish in the early 19th century, King Ferdinand VII had imposed absolutism once again, curtailing many freedoms in Cuba. This led to an increase in Cuban nationalism and calls for independence in the 1830s and 1840s, driven by both the Creole classes and the Black Slave revolts. In the second half of the 19th century, a real Cuban independence movement started to lead to wars against the Spanish authorities, starting in 1868. The movement was mainly led by the wealthier planters. The British, seeking to end slavery worldwide, pressured the Spanish to promise to eventually end slavery, which led to increasingly brutal reprisals against slave revolts. Two wars. The 10 Years' War began in 1868 when wealthy planters in Cuba proclaimed an independent republic and fought against the Spanish authorities for a decade. The war ended in defeat for the Cubans, but a year later, another war broke out due to dissatisfaction with the truce that was signed. This war, known as the Little War, lasted only a year and ended in another Spanish military victory. Despite this, the Spanish began to make some concessions. 1886 to 1898. Cuba's desire for independence grew stronger in the late 19th century, and in 1895, Cuban exiles from Latin America and the United States started the Cuban War of Independence. The war raged on for many years, with the Cuban rebels being successful at claiming large parts of the island. However, the United States became increasingly pressured by public opinion and got involved in the war in 1898, following the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The war eventually led to Cuba's independence from Spain, and in 1902, Cuba became a republic. Spanish-American War. The aftermath of the Spanish-American War, Cuba did become a protectorate of the United States, with the US occupying the island until 1902 and having significant influence over its policies and economy for many years after. This was in line with the US's broader imperialist ambitions at the time, as it also acquired territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines from Spain. The US's involvement in the war also marked its emergence as a global power and set the stage for its interventions in other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean in the decades to come. Sergeant Revolt, 1933. In 1933, a group of army sergeants and officers, dissatisfied with the corruption in the government and US involvement in Cuban affairs, led a rebellion known as the Sergeants' Revolt. They successfully overthrew the government of Gerardo Machado, who was viewed as a US puppet, and formed a provisional government. However, the new government was quickly replaced by another one that was heavily influenced by the US. Throughout the 1900s, the US largely controlled Cuba until the Cuban Revolution in 1959, which resulted in Cuba gaining true independence and becoming a socialist country. In conclusion, the Cuban Revolution was a pivotal event in world history, with far-reaching consequences for Cuba and the rest of the world. These historical photos captured the intense and terrifying times of revolution, depicting the violence, destruction, and human suffering that accompanied the struggle for power. Despite its complexities, the Cuban Revolution remains a significant chapter in the ongoing struggle for freedom, justice, and equality.